Hey everyone! Great to be back with you all again. It's been over 2 years since I first put out my review of Klonoa Door to Phantomile for the PlayStation 1, and though it may not look like it, I was super excited to replay and review Klonoa 2, Lunatea's Veil as well, before having issues with my backward-compatible PS3. Long story, don't want to talk about it. Anyway, I'm happy to say those worries are over, and the video is here. It's no secret that I absolutely loved the original PS1 game, and was even more excited to dive back into this one and give it another go for this video. Is the magic still there? Grab your board, and we'll see just how well Klonoa 2, Lunatea's Veil for the PlayStation 2 holds up today! Developed and published by Namco and released in 2001 for the PlayStation 2, Klonoa 2, Lunatea's Veil is the direct sequel to Klonoa Door to Phantomile, a 2D and 2.5D platformer with constantly rotating 3D imagery, while Klonoa himself moves across a 2D plane, with multiple branching pathways, all while taking out enemies, solving puzzles, and working through other various challenges in order to complete the game's numerous stages and work to save the land of Lunatea. Unlike the original game, where Klonoa and other characters were made up of two-dimensional sprites to go with the 3D backdrops, Klonoa & Co. have now also made the jump to 3D, with a stylish level of cel-shaded graphics to boot. Hideo Yoshizawa, director of the first game, would return for Klonoa 2, but this time under more of a production role. The project was very much still his. The game's setting, the dream world of Lunatea, is a very different place from the world we experienced in the first title. It's comprised of 4 different kingdoms with very different appearances from one another. One area looks like a set of factories, while another resembles a giant amusement park. It's all very trippy and fits the dream aesthetic quite well. So what's the story this time around? We begin with Klonoa floating around in darkness, possibly in some form of a dream, while a voice calls out to him, asking for help. Once the world around him begins to materialize, Klonoa is thrown into water with mysterious sky pirates appearing above him, attempting to steal his ring. 2 characters named Lolo and Popka appear, saving Klonoa just in time. After Klonoa comes to, the two share their names and we find out that Lolo is actually a priestess in training. She refers to Klonoa as the Dream Traveler. Before we can find out more, the group gets attacked and Lolo puts herself in Klonoa's ring so he can use its powers. The group reaches the first of multiple spirit bells placed across the land of Lunatea. After making it ring, Popka explains that only those ready to become a priestess can ring it. After celebrating Lolo's new feat, the group heads out to find Baguji, a local prophet. From here we learn that Baguji has prophesied that Klonoa, aka the Dream Traveler, would appear before them, explaining how Lolo and Popka knew to look for him. From here we learn that Klonoa, Lolo, and Popka must locate and ring the other 4 bells in order to gather their elements and save Lunatea. With enemies like Liarina and Tat on their tail, it's up to Klonoa and his new friends to set things right. Just as he did in the first game, Klonoa uses a special ring to grab enemies, objects, and everything in between to progress through each stage. He can also use grabbed enemies to give himself an extra boost and reach higher places, as well as the ability to float and glide for a short amount of time to prevent falling. What separates this game and its predecessor from other platformers of its type is the creative ways it uses these mechanics. Instead of changing up the gameplay as you progress into the gameplay remains exactly the same, while the creativity comes from all the different ways you'll be implementing it throughout each stage. For example, one stage may have you grab an enemy in mid-air, only to throw it and jump to the next, while another stage may have you grab an enemy with a helicopter blade just to fly with it up to the platform or item you need to reach. Part of the game's difficulty also comes from the amount of health you are given, which is quite low at a measly 3 heart containers. While this will typically be enough to get you through the game's various challenges, it can also cause a few deaths due to how quickly you can lose those hearts from even a single tricky enemy, and a lack of recovery time to get out of it. Still, it's not likely to hold you back for too long, whether you're new to this kind of game or not. Seeing as the environments are in 2.5D, it's important to note that your interactions with these environments also have some 3D elements to them. Like here, where Klonoa is seen grabbing an enemy for an attempt to throw it forward towards the egg instead of just left or right. These stage designs also lead to Klonoa having options to follow more than one path on occasion. And then of course there are segments like snowboarding that also follow the more 3D-ish model of things. While difficult to reach 100%, these stages are loads of fun to play. And hey, you even get a funny song where Klonoa sings the lyrics in his gibberish style that we've all grown to adore. Who doesn't love that? You'd be forgiven for thinking that the entire game is going to be a cakewalk due to how easy the first set of stages is, but the final few, particularly near the end of the game, will dispel that thought from your mind very quickly. While I wouldn't go calling the game exceptionally difficult either, I will say it still took me by surprise as I went along, even after beating the first title and jumping into this one shortly after. While this style of gameplay can be considered very simplistic and easy to pick up, it never ends up feeling too repetitive due to the creativity of the level design, the enemies and methods to defeat them with, and the unique puzzles to solve with both the enemies and environments around you. There's also a bit of variety when it comes to collecting all of the items in each area. For example, every stage has a total of 150 Dreamstones. If you manage to get them all, you'll unlock a piece of artwork in the game's scrapbook menu. There are also 6 star-shaped items called Moonstones that are typically harder to find and collect than the Dreamstones. Finding all of these will grant you special in-game features as well. And just like in the first, Klonoa 2 has a load of unique and interesting boss fights coming at the tail end of each world. The patterns of each enemy type are easy enough to recognize, but do become more challenging as you go along. The last 2 fights make this extremely evident and quelled any fears I had about the game being too easy. In fact, if I were to talk about how difficult the game really is, I'd say that's more up to the way you're trying to play it. Are you just trying to cruise through the story without feeling the need to get every single item? Then the game should be easy enough for you to get through without too much trouble. Are you a completionist, trying to find every single secret and item imaginable? Then I think you'll find a surprisingly challenging experience ahead of you, with a lot of those moments where you'll need to get through a stage perfectly in order to come out the victor. I felt like this challenge was rewarding, without many of the typical frustrations that you tend to come across with these types of games. The controls are very precise, and it's easy enough to see everything coming at you from a distance. This gives you enough time to properly plan your next course of action, and avoid any cheap deaths that you wouldn't have seen coming otherwise. The game's story also has a nice flow of progression to it as you continue to learn more about Lolo, Popka, and especially Leorina, whose characterization really stole the show here. If I were to make any complaint about the game's story, and this is really reaching here, it would be that I didn't find it to be nearly as engaging, heart-wrenching, or even as memorable as the first games. But with that said, I still enjoyed the game's plot developments, and was just as sad to see it come to an end regardless. You simply don't see titles like this every day. I've seen some try and state that they're not sure if the game's ending actually ties into the originals in any way. Without going into spoilers, my take here is that the game is still a continuation of the original, with everything happening the way it does in spite of that ending. My interpretation here is that each entry in this series has Klonoa wander from dream world to dream world, typically helping those in need in the process, kind of like the way Max in Mad Max would travel from place to place for similar reasons. I believe these scenarios can all exist without having to necessarily be connected all the time, and that's what I believe the story was also going for here, as the concept of the Dream Traveler really does make more sense when you begin to piece it all together. It basically allows for an infinite number of sequel opportunities. And who could complain about that? Just like the first, I think that this title is essential to anyone who enjoys a great 2D or 2.5D platformer that isn't necessarily out to send you into cheap deaths or other roadblocks that would otherwise prevent you from liking it. The beautiful landscapes and the charming cast of characters really make it stand out from your typical platformer, and the constant change-ups to the level design actually help to make sure that you'll enjoy the ride from start to finish. It's a rare gem that you simply can't find anywhere else, and just as essential to play as the first. This is the kind of title that will make you feel like a child again, and give you a sense of wonder that you may have even forgotten you could experience from this type of game. Even though I still put the original just slightly above this one in terms of the overall package, I still can't recommend this sequel enough. It's every bit as worthy, and belongs right up there on the shelf next to it. Play this one immediately. In the end, I really can't think of many bad things to say about this title. The dreamlike worlds and atmosphere that made the original game so memorable remain intact here, and thanks to the graphical updates managed to give us a distinctive style that complements and even expands upon the look and feel of Door to Phantomile quite nicely. While you could argue that something was lost after the series made the change from 2D sprites all the way to 3D cel-shaded character models, I think that the new style is equally as charming in its own colorful ways, and just happy that the game got made in any capacity. Whether you played and loved the first, or are just jumping into this series for the first time with this entry, you're bound to have an amazing time. And that's going to do it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching. Have you played this game before yourself? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're feeling generous, please consider donating to my Patreon, where awesome people like Brandon, Thomas, Cielo, Andrew, and Jonathan all help to keep this channel going. Until next time, my friends, WAHOO! I can't do it, but you know.